Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we're continuing the series of The Process, and we're talking about Jacob's process to becoming Israel. So, to understand the story of Jacob, we first have to understand the story of Isaac, his father. Last week, we talked about Abraham, and if you listen to that episode, you know that Isaac is the son of Abraham, and so Jacob, aka Israel, is the grandson of Abraham. So, a little backstory about Isaac. He is the promised son of Abraham, so he's the son that God gave Abraham and Sarah at their old age. He is the one Abraham almost sacrificed. So when it was time for Isaac to marry, his father was understandably particular about who he would marry. And Abraham sent a servant to find Isaac a wife. And that story is it's quite nice and, one for another day. But maybe we should have a series about how men found their wives. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
If anyone cares, tell us on Instagram. All right. So, like we were saying, the story is quite nice. But however, the woman the servant finds is Rebecca. And so they get married. So Isaac marries Rebecca.
Right.
And fast forward 20 years and Rebecca is struggling to have a baby.
Right. Which we've heard before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite many times.
Yes.
So Isaac prays and God hears his prayer and Rebecca gets pregnant. Turns out, though, that it's twins.
Right.
Yes. So Jacob's story starts in the womb before he's even born. He started out with a struggle with his twin brother Esau. Rebecca could even feel the struggle in her womb and ask God, hey, what's going on?
Right.
What's going on in here?
Stuff going on inside her. And she's like, there's something different about this.
Yeah, what's happening?
Yeah.
And there was no sonograms.
No.
So God, what's going on?
Yeah. I'm sure it was all a mystery to her.
Yes. And then in Genesis 25:23, and this is the NLT, the Bible tells us, and the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. So to get a little teachy in this moment, this reminds us of the struggle between Cain and Abel, which as we know happens in Genesis as well. Also in this story in particular, it is said that Esau was Isaac's favorite son and Jacob was Rebekah's favorite son. So we see the divide between them since they literally came out of the womb.
Right.
Yeah. So we know the struggle continued because when they were born, Esau is born first, but Jacob is holding on to his heel. Jacob's name is known to mean supplanter or a deceiver. And another TT moment here, Jacob, the word Jacob also sounds like the Hebrew word for heel. And that's why in some sermons and teaching that you'll see, they will also call him heel grabber.
Yes. Both because of the sound of his name and because of what happened when they were born.
Yes.
So
yes. Because
double-sided.
It's a double whammy. Exactly. So this is basically like a list of the things that Jacob did. Okay, here we go. He tells his brother Esau to sell him his birthright. The full story is that Esau had been working, came home super hungry, he was ravenous, and he wanted something to eat. So Jacob said, I'll sell you a bowl of lentils in exchange for your birthright. Lentils are beans, people, okay? So he was like, I'll give you some beans if you give me your birthright as the firstborn son. And
that's it. There's no meat.
It was meat. It was just
Monday.
beans. It was a vegetarian meal.
Mm-hmm.
Could potentially even be vegan.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, and Esau goes, I'll take it.
Yep. Here you go.
Yeah. Here's
my
everything.
Birthright,
yes, exactly. Here's my whole inheritance.
Me being the firstborn.
And I'm really needing those beans.
I'm just hungry.
Yeah, so he agreed. Jacob, with the help of his mother, then tricks his father Isaac, who at the time was older and he couldn't see well. He was semi-blind, to bless him and give him the inheritance and the blessing that actually belonged to Esau. Because he does this, Jacob and his mom fear that Esau is going to want to kill him now. So he flees from Esau and goes to stay with his uncle Laban in a town called Haran, which if you've been around, we've talked about Haran before. Mm-hmm. It's a popular spot. Yes.
Very touristy, I guess.
Very touristy, great attractions. Don't really know what those are, but...
Great place to raise a family, I guess.
Yeah, that's what we've heard.
Yeah. That's the rumors.
So to get a little teachy, we know that Jacob is running so Esau doesn't kill him, right? But his mom, Rebecca, when she approaches Isaac, they make it seem like he's going to go find a wife rather than actually getting away from Esau.
Right.
Instead of telling Isaac, hey, he's going to go away because he just literally stole everything from his brother. It's just no, I don't want him to marry these types of women, like Canaanite women. So I'm just going to send him away. And
I mean, there's truth to that, but that wasn't the primary reason.
Right.
But they're like, let's just say this is the reason.
Yeah, because they were in cahoots the whole time. Yeah. So on his way to his uncle's, he takes a rest and Jacob has a dream. In this dream, God is revealing himself to Jacob and basically showing him the promises that he has for him. Now, there's a lot that goes on in this, so like just go to the Bible and read it yourself. But that's the essence of what happens. Yeah. And then the Bible says in Genesis 28:16 and 17, then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid and said, what an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. So because of that, in his experience there, he places a pillar to remember the place and also names it Bethel, which means house of God. So he continued on his way and he makes it to his uncle's place. He meets Rachel, which was Laban's daughter, the younger of 2 daughters that he had. And Jacob falls in love with her and makes a deal with his uncle to be able to marry her. The deal was Jacob would work for his uncle for 7 years and then he would be able to marry Rachel fair and square.
So yes, Laban agrees to this, and after the 7 years, he throws Jacob a big wedding ceremony, right? Because this is a promise he had for him, a big feast. And Laban actually tricks Jacob, and after the whole party, he actually gives him Rachel's sister, Leah, instead. And because it was very dark and they had been partying and all this stuff, he didn't realize that he got the other sister until the morning, and he had already slept with her.
Yes.
So he realizes this is the wrong sister.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Which is crazy.
Yeah,
what
that's
are you
like
doing
a Lifetime movie. That's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. So just a teaching moment here that we wanted to bring to your attention is that he's mad that he was tricked into sleeping with the wrong woman, which of course he has all the right to be, right? Because he's like, I made a deal with you to marry Rachel. But he tricked his father and stole his brother's inheritance. So it's kind of, as well.
Yeah, like the trickster
same thing
gets
that happened,
tricked.
yeah, to
it's
him.
Very interesting.
Kind of gets, happens to him as well. So it's kind of funny the way that those things happen. But of course he's upset because that's not who he worked for.
Yeah, and it's been 7 years, man. How dare you?
So it was a long process.
Yeah.
And he was patient. So he's tricked and he confronts his uncle and it's like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? And of course his uncle has to give him like, or it's not customary to give the youngest daughter. So I had to give you the oldest daughter. Like, that's just how we do it over here. And so of course he can't fight that. It's kind of like, it already happened anyway. So he's, upset, but he tells his uncle that he'll work another 7 years, or he agrees with his uncle, like, hey, if you work another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel. The deal here is you can have Rachel now, but just commit to working for 7 years.
Yeah.
So because he loves her and all that, he does. So he decides to commit, and he now has 2 wives. He has Rachel as well. So Jacob, at this point, he does have many children. So of course, back then they had many wives, and these wives, each of them had a servant, right? Or a
handmaiden?
A handmaid or something like that. So if you have heard stories of the Bible, you'll hear about the 12 tribes. And so we're gonna kind of share with you what those, or not who those are, but this is where they come from, just so you kind of have an understanding. So he had children with Leah, which was the first sister. She actually had 6 boys, which are part of the 12 tribes. And then she also had a daughter later in life. And then
not part of the 12 tribes.
No.
Because the 12 tribes come from men.
From men, yeah.
Yes.
Just disclaimer there.
Yes.
So the six were, and then the daughter, which was not. And then Leah had a servant, and Jacob had 2 kids with that servant. And then Rachel later on had 2 kids as well. And then Rachel's servant had an additional 2 kids.
Yeah.
So kind of all spread out, but that's where the 12 kind of comprise. So just kind of FYI.
Yeah, all the sons, subtract the sister.
Subtract the sister,
yes.
And that's where the 12
12,
were.
Yep.
Okay, so once the 7 years were completed, he did go to his father-in-law, his uncle, Laban, and he was like, hey, could I leave? I've worked all these years. I kind of want to take my family back. And they do. They strike up a deal, and they kind of do this deal with their flock, right? They're like, okay, we're going to kind of divide up the flock. You're going to work for a few more years, but this kind of be like your pay, however we do that. So we won't go into all that detail because there's a lot of like different things that they went through, but this was kind of the agreement that they did. But again, Laban wasn't exactly true to his word, but through all of it, even though he was kind of being tricked, or not everything was being truthful from Laban's side, God still blessed Jacob even throughout this whole process. So Jacob has a dream again, and God kind of tells him and shows him what Laban had done to him, and that, hey, this is now your time to go back home. Of course, there's some family drama between him and his father-in-law, but they kind of work it out. It's settled. And then when he's leaving, or, when he decides that, he does reach out to his brother Esau and says, like, I'll give you all these cattle and servants, kind of hoping to mend things, right? To be friendly again. Understanding like what he had done to his brother. So it was kind of his way of like kind of reaching out, right? So Jacob doesn't know what Esau is about to do, or like what he's been up to, or he doesn't know what Esau will do. So Jacob sends his family away. So like he's kind of reached out, but he's also afraid of kind of like, I don't know what his reaction is going to be when I see him. I don't want him to hurt, obviously, like my people. So he sends them away. And so this means that Jacob is now alone. And he actually confronts and wrestles with a man, which, spoiler, later on we find out that it's actually God. And so the Bible says in Genesis 32, 25 to 28, when the man saw that he would not win the match, the one he was wrestling, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of his socket. Then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. So it's revealed to him, like, this is God who you're wrestling, and he changes his name. And so he also like gives him this blessing over his life. And because of all this, the Bible says that Jacob named the place that he was at where he wrestled Peniel, which means face of God. And for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. And this is in Genesis 32:30. And of course, we've heard that where people couldn't see God, like God's face, like they would die. And so for him to have this encounter was like major. Mm-hmm. And so for him, it was like, wow, like I saw God face to face, and I'm here to I live to tell the story. So of course that was very impactful, and that's kind of part of him whole renaming the place and everything. So just as a reminder of this event and very life-changing moment, Jacob, who is now known as Israel, is left with a limp, which was it was his reminder of this blessing and this moment that he had. So after that totally amazing encounter with God, we kind of come back to that moment where we know that he had reached out to Esau. So Esau's on his way to see Jacob. Esau actually turned down all the gifts that Jacob had sent to him and was like, I don't need all your gifts. But then he does actually end up accepting them just because Jacob's insistent. And it's kind of like his way of like, I just want to show you like how sorry I am for everything that happened. Yeah. But you can kind of see like things aren't like as bad as Jacob thought they were. So the Bible says, Jacob approached his brother. He bowed to the ground 7 times before him. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. And they both wept. So they had a very nice reconciliation.
Yeah. And to think of like, I think we talk about these brothers, but like we said at the beginning of the story, they're actually twins, right? And twins have this like special connection, and to like have been, because it was the 7 years and then another 7 years and then a couple, like it's been like what, 15 to 20 years since they've seen each other.
I think I read somewhere where it was about 20 years.
Yeah.
He worked the 14, 7, and then an additional like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
With the flock and all that.
Yeah, and the last time they saw each other, it was like one stole the blessing and then the other one was plotting to kill him. But it's been so long, like they're grown men now. Right. So that's great. Like, the twins were reconciled.
And the whole thing with the mother, like just a lot of life stuff I'm sure that has gone on. Yeah. So it's very kind of nice to see this moment of it kind of coming full circle, of them kind of having grown and now reconciling. Yeah. And it's kind of cool because they're twins. So it's kind of cool. So that's the story of how Jacob becomes Israel. Of course, like other stories we've shared, there's so much more detail. So if you're interested in reading it, you can start kind of from Genesis 25 through chapter 32, more or less. But there is so much in this story. But I think the most prevalent thing is that it doesn't matter who you were before you wrestled God, if you will. Once you have that encounter with God, it's like you'll never be the same. Yeah. So you understand just the importance of when you have an encounter with God and truly experience God and who He is. Yep. Just how different your life I think the story also teaches us about what we learned from our parents and how that can carry on. So we see from the beginning how Cain and Abel didn't get along, and then we see Isaac and Ishmael, and now Jacob and Esau. And there's a recognizable pattern between all of these difficult relationships, or between the brothers. And I think it's very important, like as parents, you really have to identify these things and just recognize if there's unhealthy patterns. And I think, like in this story, we heard, how one was a favorite of one parent and the other, and that's kind of a healthy thing to have. Just making sure that we recognize things that are in the children, or as parents or future parents, things that you can help and not cause more divide or more issues within your children, or even within you that could be affected.
Right, because we see this pattern all through Genesis and all through all these new generations that keep reappearing, and it's like what happened with the father happened with the son and happened with the sons, and it's just continuous through generation to generation. So it's just identifying those things and just unlearning those unhealthy patterns so we don't pass them on to our children.
There's good things, but like in these examples, there was things that they took on that were unhealthy and didn't help the situation, and it took them 20 years to come around and reconcile and kind of get over what had happened. So,
and just an example of that is if you listen to the last episode, it's like Abraham had 2 kids, and he had Isaac and he had Ishmael, but he had to send Ishmael away, and so Isaac is the one that's going to carry on the line. But then when Isaac has children, he has twins, and then he's like, okay, this one's my favorite, and Rebecca goes, this one's my favorite. So you kind of see the same pattern over and over again. And of course it's different, and there's different nuances that go on, but we just have to be better about recognizing those unhealthy patterns and unlearning, and just being better with our own children or our future children. Or people that you just influence, like just being aware in general, definitely. So that's it. That's how Jacob becomes Israel. That's it. There's a lot more to this story, like every single story in the Bible. So we just encourage you to read it yourself. But that is just how, his name gets changed and he does become Israel. But again, there's just more to the story.
Right. Yeah.
That's all we got today. We'd like to thank you for continuing to support us and continuing to listen to the episodes every time they come out. For the people that specifically reach out to us and just let us know on Instagram or in person that they love the podcast and that they love what we're doing, we appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for caring. Thank you for listening. And we just hope that it's adding value to your life and just helping you in your relationship with God. And that's just the whole point of this. So we appreciate your support. And if you haven't already, we'd just like to ask for you to rate us on Spotify and on Apple. And if you could leave a review as well, a positive review would be even greater. But we so definitely appreciate you. And we hope that you enjoyed this episode. We will be back next week for another episode of The Process. As always, this is Fran.
This is Yadi.
And we are out of here. Bye.